The hum of the server racks was a constant lullaby in the cavernous data center, a soothing, artificial breath in the heart of the city. I'd always found it comforting, this monument to human connection and information, even on a day as oppressively hot as this one. My fingers danced over the keyboard, checking diagnostics, monitoring the endless streams of data that kept the world running. Outside, the midday sun beat down on concrete and glass, but in here, it was a cool, controlled 68 degrees, a sterile bubble against the encroaching summer. My phone buzzed. Sarah. A quick text. Lunch soon? Sushi's calling. A small smile touched my lips. Sushi sounded perfect. A brief, normal reprise from the endless glow of screens and the low thrum of machinery. I typed a quick reply. Be there in 15. That was the last normal thing I did. A low thud, not from the building, but from outside, vibrated through the floor. It was followed by another, heavier, like a rhythmic pounding. My brows furrowed. Construction? On a Saturday? Usually downtown was quiet on weekends. The hum of the servers suddenly felt less soothing, more like a warning. Then the screams started. Not the distant, muffled wails of a street argument, but primal, guttural roars of pure terror that sliced through the thick, insulated walls. They were close, too close. My heart gave a violent lurch, slamming against my ribs. I stood, abandoning the console, my eyes fixed on the heavy steel door that led out into the main corridor. A distant siren wailed, then cut off abruptly, as if silenced mid-scream. The pounding outside intensified, now accompanied by a horrific, wet, tearing sound. My stomach clenched. Something was terribly wrong. I wasn't just hearing chaos. I was feeling it in my gut, a cold, creeping dread that tightened its icy grip. What was happening out there? A loud bang echoed down the corridor, then another, metal protesting against an unseen force. Footsteps, heavy and frantic, pounded past my door. Someone was running. Someone was running from something. I took a shaky step back, eyes darting to the emergency exit sign at the far end of the room, then to the reinforced glass of the observation window that looked out onto the main server floor. The servers continued their oblivious thrum, oblivious to the world tearing itself apart outside. The door burst open, not exploded, but flung inward with such force that it crashed against the concrete wall, bending the frame. My breath hitched. Standing there, framed by the shattered doorway, was Mark, a security guard I knew, or what was left of him. His uniform was ripped, soaked in a dark, slick substance. His face was contorted, jaw hanging slack, eyes white and milky white, devoid of any recognition. A gurgling groan escaped his throat, wet and hungry. But it wasn't just his appearance. It was the speed, the sheer, impossible speed with which he lunged. Not the slow, shambling menace of the movies. This was a predator. My mind screamed, no, no, this can't be real. Mark, or the creature wearing his skin, covered the distance to my console in 2 terrifying bounds. I threw myself backward, tumbling over my chair as its outstretched hand, fingers tipped with broken bloody nails, swiped through the air where my head had been. The stench hit me then, a sickening mix of stale blood, putrefaction, and something acrid like burnt chemicals. These weren't just the dead, they had mutated. Panic clawed at my throat. I scrambled away, adrenaline flooding my system, my every instinct screaming for escape. Mark crashed into the console, sending monitors toppling, wires sparking. He didn't react to the pain, didn't even seem to notice. His dead eyes were locked on me, his jaw working, a hungry, desperate sound tearing from his throat. I heard more screams from deeper within the building. Not terror now, but pain, horrific, dying screams. The steady thrum of the server seemed to mock me, a reminder of the world that was, the world that was now gone. This wasn't just a local incident, this was a catastrophe. How could something like this happen so fast? The sheer speed, the ferocity, the mutation of the Shamblers had caught everyone off guard. I fumbled for the emergency alarm on the wall, my fingers numb.
My hand slammed against the red button. Nothing. No piercing shriek, no flashing lights. Just the echoing silence of the building's internal systems failing. Global defenses couldn't hold, not against this. Mark turned, his head snapping to track my movement as I ducked behind a row of servers. He wasn't just fast, he was aware. His movements were fluid, not the disjointed lurch I'd always imagined. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for flight. This wasn't a bad dream. This was the waking nightmare, and it had burst through my door. I knew, with a chilling certainty that seeped into my bones, that my lunch date with Sarah was never going to happen. I pressed myself against the cold metal casing of a server, trying to control my ragged breathing. Mark, the creature, was at the end of the aisle, sniffing the air. No, not sniffing. It was listening. Its head tilted, its dead eyes sweeping the narrow gap between the server racks. It was hunting me, actively. My mind raced, a frantic hamster on a broken wheel. What did I have? A utility knife on my belt? Good for opening boxes. Useless against this. My phone was still clutched in my hand. No signal. A useless brick now.
My only real weapon was stealth and the convoluted maze of the data center. A low growl ripped from Mark's throat, louder this time, filled with an unsettling intelligence. It wasn't just mindless hunger. It was focused. It was tracking me. These new Shamblers were different. They were learning, adapting. That was the terrifying truth that chilled me to the marrow. The old rules, the old movies, they were all wrong. This was an entirely new threat. I needed to get out. I needed to find Sarah. I slid further down the aisle, moving with agonizing slowness, my muscles screaming in protest, every nerve ending tingling with fear. My eyes scanned the labyrinthine rows of servers. The emergency exit was at the far end of the room, maybe 50 yards away. 50 yards of potential ambush. 50 yards of silence broken only by the server hum and the ragged growl of the creature hunting me. A faint clatter from the next aisle. Had I made a sound? Or was it Mark? I held my breath, listening, my ears straining against the internal thrum of the building. Nothing. Just the slow, deliberate shuffle of Mark's heavy boots on the anti-static floor tiles. He was moving, searching. He wasn't just reacting, he was strategizing. The revelation sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. The mutation wasn't just physical speed, it was something deeper, something cognitive. This was why global defenses couldn't hold. They weren't fighting mindless monsters, they were fighting something evolving. My hand brushed against a loose power cable. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. The creature paused, its head snapped towards my position. It heard, it knew. I bolted, down the aisle, weaving between the blinking lights of the servers, my feet thudding against the floor. Mark roared, a sound of pure predatory fury, and gave chase. His footsteps were impossibly fast, gaining on me. I didn't dare look back, my eyes fixed on the distant emergency exit sign, a beacon of desperate hope. My lungs burned, my legs screamed. I needed to move faster. I needed to think. A fire extinguisher, mounted on a pillar at the end of the aisle, my only chance. I veered hard, sliding on the polished floor, grabbing the heavy cylinder. With a grunt, I ripped it from its mounting, twisting, turning, as Mark burst from the aisle behind me. He was too close. His decaying breath washed over my neck, putrid and hot. I slammed the extinguisher into his chest with all my might. It was like hitting concrete. The impact sent a jarring shock wave up my arm, but Mark barely flinched. He stumbled back a step, a low, angered growl rumbling in his chest, but his eyes never left mine. His hands, tipped with those horrid nails, reached for me again. This wasn't working. This wasn't a fight I could win.
I didn't think, just pulled the pin and aimed the nozzle at his face. A blinding white cloud of chemical foam erupted, blasting him square in the eyes. He roared, a tortured sound, staggering back, clawing at his face. The foam coated him, obscuring his vision, momentarily disorienting him. This was my chance. I threw the now empty extinguisher aside and sprinted for the emergency exit, my legs pumping, my lungs burning. The Shambler, Mark, was still flailing in the foam, but I could hear his movements, feel his presence behind me. He wouldn't be down for long. His rage, his hunger, transcended pain. The exit door was heavier than I remembered, a solid slab of steel with a crash bar. I slammed into it, my shoulder protesting, and pushed. It didn't budge. My blood ran cold. Locked? No, it couldn't be. Emergency exits couldn't be locked. Then I saw it, a heavy chain wrapped around the crash bar and padlocked. Despair, cold and sharp, pierced through the adrenaline haze. Trapped. The thought echoed in my skull, a death knell. I spun around, my back pressed against the cold steel door. Mark was through the foam, shaking his head, his milky eyes clearing, fixing on me with renewed hunger. He was closer now, blocking my only path back into the server maze. Trapped between the mutated Shambler and a locked door. No, I whispered, the sound raw, choked. Not like this. My eyes darted around, searching, desperate. Above the door, a small window, no bigger than a textbook. Not enough for a man to fit through, but maybe a tool, a way to break the chain. The crash bar was thick, solid, the chain equally so. My utility knife was useless. Mark stalked closer, his growls growing louder, a symphony of growing hunger. He paused, his head cocked slightly, as if savoring the moment, savoring my fear. My blood ran cold. This intelligence, this deliberate cruelty, was a new, terrifying layer to the mutation. This was why global defenses couldn't hold. They weren't ready for a foe that enjoyed the hunt. I had to find something, anything. My gaze fell on a heavy-duty wrench lying on a nearby workbench, left by a technician. It was thick, solid, meant for tightening massive bolts. My only hope. But it was across the room, past Mark, past the wreckage of my console. I didn't have time to think. Mark lunged again, a blur of gray-green skin and tattered uniform. I dodged, barely, feeling the wind of his swipe against my ear. The stench of him, closer now, was overwhelming. My stomach churned, threatening to betray me. Sarah, I thought, a desperate prayer. I need to find Sarah. That thought fueled me, gave me a desperate surge of strength. I sprinted toward the workbench, ducking under Mark's next swing, feeling the cold brush of his nails against my shirt. He roared, enraged at my evasion, and turned, his movements eerily fluid. I grabbed the wrench, its cold weight reassuring in my trembling hand. It was heavy, formidable. Maybe, just maybe, enough. Mark was charging again, his speed shocking, his hunger absolute. I didn't have time to aim, didn't have time to plan. As he closed the distance, I swung the wrench in a wide, desperate arc. It connected with a sickening thud against the side of his skull. Not the face, not the temple, just the side. He stumbled, a grunt escaping his throat, but he didn't fall. He just shook his head, like a dog dislodging water, and came at me again, even faster, even more enraged. A thin line of black fluid, darker than blood, seeped from the impact site on his head. My arm screamed in protest, but I swung again, aiming lower this time, for the knee. It hit with a dull conch. Mark's leg buckled, but he caught himself, snarling. He wasn't stopping. He wasn't slowing down. These mutated Shamblers weren't just fast. They were seemingly impervious to anything but total destruction. This was why global defenses couldn't hold. Standard tactics were useless. I backed away, sweat stinging my eyes, heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. I had to get to that door. I had to break that chain. Mark roared, a sound that vibrated through my very bones, and pushed off his injured leg, lunging for me with a horrifying, desperate speed. He was a force of nature, a monster, and I was just a man with a wrench. He tackled me. The impact slammed the air from my lungs. My head hit the floor with a sickening crack, stars exploding behind my eyes.
The wrench flew from my grasp, clattering away into the darkness beneath a server rack. Mark was on me, his weight crushing. His putrid breath enveloped my face. His hands, strong, decaying, grabbed my shoulders, pinning me down. His dead eyes stared into mine, and in their milky depths I saw nothing but primal hunger. His jaw unhinged, impossibly wide, revealing rows of teeth, sharper, more jagged than I remembered. A sound, half gurgle, half hiss, escaped his throat. This was it. This was where it ended. I thrashed, screamed, but his grip was iron. My mind flashed to Sarah, her smile, the sushi we'd never eat. Regret, sharp and bitter, tore through me. I hadn't even had a chance to say goodbye. Then, through the haze of terror, I saw it. The padlock. On the chain, just beside Mark's head. My hand, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled for my utility knife, still clipped to my belt. It was a long shot, a desperate, impossible gamble, but it was all I had. I pulled it free, flipped the blade open with a click, and with a guttural scream of pure, desperate fury, I plunged it into the soft, decaying flesh of Mark's neck, right beneath his jaw, aiming for anything that would make him stop. He stiffened, a choked gasp escaping him, and his grip on me momentarily slackened. Not because of pain, but surprise, an interruption to his predatory focus. Black fluid, thick and viscous, coated my hand. It was enough. I twisted, kicked, shoved him off me. He stumbled back, clawing at his neck, the knife still embedded. He roared, an infuriated sound, and turned his milky eyes back to me. The rage in them was colder, more focused than before. I hadn't killed him, I'd only angered him. But I was free. I scrambled to my feet, my head throbbing, my vision blurring at the edges. The wrench. I needed the wrench. My eyes frantically searched the floor. There, beneath the server rack. Mark was coming again, slower now, his movements more deliberate, his neck wound oozing black. He was learning. He was adapting. I dove for the wrench, my fingers closing around the cold metal. I didn't stand up. I crawled, staying low, making my way back to the chained emergency exit. Mark stalked after me, his breathing ragged, a low, constant growl vibrating in the air. He wasn't rushing now. He was cutting me off, forcing me into the corner. He knew. I reached the door, pulled myself up, and with trembling hands, I raised the wrench. Not for Mark, but for the padlock. Swing. The heavy wrench slammed into the padlock with a deafening clang. It barely left a scratch. The metal was too thick. Swing again. Another clang. Another scratch. My arms were screaming, my shoulders burning. This was taking too long. Mark was right behind me, his growls vibrating against my back. I could feel his hot, fetid breath on my neck. Swing. Harder. My vision swam. The padlock was dented, just slightly. Swing. Again and again. I was hitting it like a madman, fueled by pure, unadulterated terror. Each swing was a prayer, a desperate plea for survival. A hand clamped on my shoulder. Mark. I screamed, a raw animal sound, and spun, bringing the wrench up in a desperate arc. This time, I aimed for the head. Not the side, not the jaw, the head. The wrench connected with a horrifying wet crunch against the side of his skull, just above his ear. Black fluid and something white, bone perhaps, splattered against the door. He staggered, convulsed, then collapsed in a boneless heap. Silence. Only the steady hum of the servers now, a mocking reminder of the fragile peace that had been shattered. I stood there, panting, the wrench heavy in my hand, staring at Mark's twitching corpse. His dead eyes still stared up at me, milky and accusing. The knife was still in his neck.
My body trembled uncontrollably. I'd killed him, or what was left of him. The weight of it, the sickening reality of it, threatened to overwhelm me.
This wasn't a game. This was real, and I was covered in his black ichor, my hand shaking. The padlock, still there, still mocking me. I looked at Mark's broken head. Had that done it? Had that finally stopped him? The mutation made them tough, but the head was still the weak point. It had to be. I raised the wrench again, my arm screaming, and brought it down on the padlock with a final, desperate swing. This time, the sound was different, a sharp crack, followed by the distinct metallic clink of a broken chain. The padlock snapped, falling to the floor. The chain unraveled. Freedom. My hand, still shaking, fumbled for the crash bar. I pushed it, and the heavy steel door swung inward, revealing a dimly lit, narrow alleyway. The air outside was thick with the smell of smoke and decay, a stark contrast to the sterile air of the data center. Distant screams, closer now, rent the air. I stepped out, my legs wobbly, into the nightmare. The mutation of the Shamblers, the collapse of global defenses, it was all out here, and I was alone. What would I find? What had happened to Sarah? The alley beckoned, dark and unknown, and I knew, with a terrible certainty, that my nightmare had only just begun. The alley was a canyon of brick and dumpsters, echoing with the distant sounds of a city tearing itself apart. Smoke stung my nostrils, mixing with the cloying sweetness of decay, and something else, something metallic and burnt. My head still throbbed from the fall, and the black ichor on my hands felt like a brand, a permanent mark of the horror I just escaped. Each breath was a struggle, ragged and shallow. My entire body felt like a live wire, humming with terror and the lingering shock of violence. I leaned against the cool brick of the building, eyes scanning the alley. Trash cans were overturned, garbage strewn across the pavement. A discarded pizza box lay open, its contents already crawling with flies, a grotesque still life of a world suddenly ended. A mangled bicycle, one wheel bent at a sickening angle, lay abandoned, a testament to someone's desperate failed escape. This was not the quiet, familiar alley I knew. This was a war zone. The screams were closer now, punctuated by what sounded like distant gunfire, sharp staccato bursts followed by unsettling silence. It wasn't the organized volley of military precision. It sounded desperate, panicked, like individual struggles. It reinforced the terrifying truth: global defenses couldn't hold. Whatever was happening, it had overwhelmed everything, everywhere. The Shamblers had mutated, and the world was paying the price.
I swallowed, my throat dry and scratchy. Sarah, she worked in the office building 3 blocks over. Was she safe? Was anyone? The thought of her, terrified and alone, spurred me forward. I had to find her. I moved slowly, cautiously, my senses heightened, every shadow a potential threat. The air was heavy, oppressive, like a blanket woven from fear and despair. The ground was littered with debris, shattered glass, papers, a child's bright red ball, innocent and out of place in this tableau of destruction. The silence between the screams was just as unnerving, a held breath before the next wave of terror. At the end of the alley, a street, not Main Street, but a smaller artery. I crept to the edge, peering around the brick corner. The scene that unfolded before me punched the air from my lungs. Cars, some abandoned mid-traffic, others crashed into each other, formed a chaotic metal sculpture. A bus lay on its side, black smoke curling from its scorched shell. But it was the people, or what looked like people, that truly froze me. Dozens of them, Shamblers, everywhere. They moved with a terrifying, unnatural fluidity. Not the staggering, lurching walk I'd always imagined, but a swift, purposeful gait that belied their deadness. Some were tearing at something, a dark, indistinguishable mass on the pavement. Others simply wandered, heads twitching, their milky eyes scanning. And then there were the ones that were different.
One, a woman in a business suit, moved on all fours, scuttling with unnatural speed, her movements eerily reminiscent of a spider. Another, larger, bulkier, seemed to have hardened skin, almost like armor, shrugging off a glancing blow from a falling piece of debris. And their roars, they weren't just moans. They were varied, some shrill and piercing, others deep, guttural bellows that rattled my teeth. This was the mutation. This was what had truly broken everything. These weren't just common shamblers. These were something new, something worse. I ducked back, heart hammering against my ribs, struggling to process the sheer scale of the horror. My mind recoiled, unable to accept the reality. It was too fast, too sudden. 1 minute sushi. The next, the world had become a living hell, teeming with evolving monsters. My eyes fell on a dumpster, its lid askew, a glimmer of something inside. I cautiously approached, my wrench held tight. Reaching in, my fingers closed around a heavy crowbar. Better than a wrench, lighter, longer, with a prying end, a weapon, a tool, a chance. The stench from the dumpster was horrific, but I forced it down, clinging to the crowbar like a lifeline. I needed a plan. I couldn't just run blindly into that. I needed to observe, to understand their patterns, if they even had any.
I peered around the corner again. A smaller group of shamblers was shambling down a side street, drawn by some distant sound. Their backs were to me. An opening. My building, the data center, was a fortress of concrete and steel, secure, isolated. But I couldn't stay there, not with Sarah out there. The idea of her facing this alone, of her terror, spurred me past my own fear. I had to move. I gripped the crowbar, the cold steel a stark contrast to my sweaty palms. My throat felt like sandpaper. Okay, I whispered to myself, my voice raspy. Okay, one step at a time. My journey began as a series of calculated risks. I moved from shadow to shadow, from wrecked car to abandoned kiosk, using every available cover. The sheer silence of the abandoned vehicles was eerie, a stark contrast to the distant cacophony of screams and roars. The sun, once a source of warmth and life, now seemed to mock me, illuminating the horrific tableau of a dying city. I passed a storefront, its windows shattered, mannequins lying in grotesque poses, covered in dust and debris. Further down, a family car, its doors ajar, a child's shoe lying on the pavement. My heart ached with a profound, searing sorrow for the lives that had been ripped apart, for the innocence that had been brutally extinguished. This wasn't just survival, it was witnessing the death of everything I knew. I spotted another one, a shambler, but unlike Mark, this one was leaner, faster. It scuttled across the street, a blur of motion, leaping over a wrecked sedan with astonishing agility. Its eyes seemed to track distant movements with chilling precision. This new level of mutation truly explained why global defenses couldn't hold. They weren't just dealing with a pathogen, they were dealing with rapid, terrifying evolution. Every turn brought a new, horrific variant. My mind raced. How could anyone fight this? The military, the police, they were trained for human threats, not for this. Not for things that moved like animals, had hardened skin, or could track you with unnatural senses. The sheer speed of the collapse suddenly made sense. They were caught completely off guard. I reached the corner of Sarah's building. It was a 30-story skyscraper, mostly glass and steel. Now, many of its windows were shattered, reflecting the orange glow of distant fires like gaping, bloody eyes. A few floors up, a plume of black smoke curled from a broken window, testament to some internal fire. My heart sank. This wasn't just an attack, it was total devastation. The street below was eerily quiet, save for the distant sounds of the apocalypse. No shamblers in sight, for the moment. A brief respite, but one I knew wouldn't last. I moved to the main entrance, a revolving door, now jammed and shattered, shards of glass gleaming ominously. "Sarah?" I whispered, my voice barely audible,
echoing in the vast, empty lobby. Silence. Just the creak of the damaged revolving door, moving slightly in the hot wind. The lobby itself was chaos. Overturned furniture, scattered papers, a broken potted plant spilling soil across the polished marble. It smelled of fear, dust, and something else familiar, something metallic. Blood. My eyes scanned the scene, fear constricting my throat. A security desk abandoned, a computer screen still showing a flickering image of a news report. Static field, a desperate anchor pleading for people to stay indoors. The date on the screen was today, this morning. It had all happened so fast. The world had gone from normal to hell in a matter of hours. I crept further into the lobby, crowbar held high. Every shadow seemed to twist and writhe. Every creak of the building made me jump. My imagination, usually a source of comfort, was now my enemy, painting vivid pictures of what horrors might lurk behind every pillar. A door, slightly ajar, led to the stairwell, my only real option. Elevators would be death traps. I pushed the door open, its hinges groaning like a tired old man. Darkness, and the thick, clawing smell of stagnant air. And something else, something foul. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm my racing heart. This was it. This was where I went deeper into the lion's den. For Sarah. I closed my eyes for a second, picturing her face, her vibrant smile. That image was the only thing keeping me from crumpling to the ground in a sobbing heap. The stairwell was a concrete tomb, the only light coming from the occasional sliver through the main lobby, casting long, distorted shadows. The air was thick, heavy, tasting of dust and decay. Every step I took echoed, magnifying the silence, amplifying my fear. I hugged the wall, crowbar extended, my eyes darting between the landings above and below. My mind reeled with unanswered questions. How had this started? What was this mutation? Why were they so fast, so strong, so relentless? The news reports had talked about outbreaks, isolated incidents, but this was an apocalypse that had unfurled with horrifying speed. It truly meant that global defenses couldn't hold, that the scale of the threat was beyond anything humanity was prepared for. I climbed, one painful step at a time. Each floor was identical, a dizzying spiral of concrete and steel. The silence stretched, unnerving, until it was broken by a new sound, a low scratching noise, from above. My breath hitched. I froze, pressing myself against the wall, listening. Scratch, scratch, scrape. It was coming down.
And it sounded like something heavy, something with sharp claws. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. Was it one of the new mutated Shamblers, the kind that scuttled on all fours? My palms grew slick with sweat. I raised the crowbar, my knuckles white, muscles tensed, ready for whatever horror descended. The scratching grew louder, closer, echoing in the confined space. Then a low growl, deep and guttural, unlike anything I'd heard before. This was a true monster. This was why global defenses crumbled. They weren't fighting humans anymore. A shadowy form appeared on the landing above, indistinct in the gloom. It moved with a horrifying, jerky speed, dropping a few steps at a time. I gripped the crowbar tighter, my mouth dry. This was it. This was the moment of truth. The form resolved itself, not into a scuttling beast, but a man, or what used to be one. His clothes were ripped, his skin mottled, but his movements were what truly unnerved me. He wasn't walking, he was leaping from step to step, a horrifying parody of a parkour enthusiast, landing with soft thuds. His face was a mask of primal rage, eyes wide and bloodshot, jaws working, making that low, rumbling growl. He had been a businessman, judging by the tattered remains of his suit. Now he was just a weapon, a vehicle of the new horror. He saw me. His head snapped up, eyes locking onto mine with an unnerving intensity.
The growl intensified, a challenge, a promise of violence. And then he launched himself, not down the stairs, but across the gap between the two sides of the stairwell, a distance of at least 15 feet. My jaw dropped. This was impossible. This was not a normal shambler. This was a leap of unnatural strength, a brutal testament to the mutation that had overtaken them. He landed on the railing of my side, clinging there for a moment like a grotesque gargoyle, before dropping to the steps just 5 feet above me. My mind screamed in disbelief. This was a nightmare far beyond anything I could have imagined. This was why global defenses couldn't hold, because the enemy literally defied the laws of physics. I swung the crowbar in a wide, desperate arc as he lunged the remaining distance. It connected with a sickening crack against his ribs. He grunted, a sound of pain, but not enough to stop him. He kept coming, his dead hands reaching for me, his mouth open, jaws snapping. I backed down the steps, swinging again, connecting with his arm. It buckled, bone giving way with a soft snap, but he still didn't stop. His other hand lashed out, a blur of motion, and his fingers closed around my arm, his nails digging in, tearing at my skin. A searing pain ripped through my arm. I cried out, dropping the crowbar.
It clattered down the steps, echoing hollowly. He pulled me closer, his strength immense, inhuman. His decaying face was inches from mine, his fetid breath washing over me. I could see the individual jagged teeth, the milky depths of his dead eyes. Terror, pure and absolute, paralyzed me. Then a sudden, blinding flash, a gunshot, loud, deafening in the enclosed space. The Shambler stiffened, its grip on my arm slackening. Its head snapped back, a crimson hole appearing in its forehead. It slumped, releasing me, and toppled backward down the stairs, hitting each step with a wet thud. It came to a stop in a crumpled heap at the bottom, still. I stood there, panting, my arm throbbing, blood welling up from the scratch. My ears rang from the gunshot. My mind struggled to comprehend what had just happened. I was alive, but who? "Are you okay?" A woman's voice, firm but laced with adrenaline. I turned, my eyes blurring, to see a figure standing on the landing above, a pistol held steady in her hands. It was an older woman, perhaps late 50s, with short, practical gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that assessed me with a professional intensity. She wore a worn leather jacket and tactical pants, clearly prepared, clearly capable. This was no ordinary survivor. "My arm," I choked out, pointing to the bleeding scratches. "He got me." Her gaze hardened. She holstered her pistol, then pulled a small, compact first aid kit from her belt. "Let's see it." Her voice was calm, authoritative. A stark contrast to the screaming chaos outside and the panic still raging in my own heart. I followed her up to the landing, still shaking, my mind trying to catch up with the sudden shift from near death to rescue. She knelt, inspecting the scratches. "Deep, but not a bite," she murmured, her fingers surprisingly gentle as she cleaned the wound with an antiseptic wipe. The sting brought me back to reality. "You're lucky. His kind, they don't just bite anymore. Any broken skin, any entry point, and you're done for." My blood ran cold. "The mutation," I whispered. "It's spreading through scratches too?" She nodded grimly. "And fluids, and apparently through the very air in some zones, though that's still being debated by what's left of the CDC. Her eyes met mine. The Shamblers mutated, fast, faster than anyone could predict. Their methods of infection, their physical capabilities, they all adapted. That's why global defenses couldn't hold. We were fighting ghosts of the past, not the monsters of the present. Her words were a chilling confirmation of my own terrifying observations. The speed of the spread, the sudden collapse, it all made a horrifying, desperate sense now. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice still hoarse. "Dr. Eris Thorne," she said, finishing the bandage with practiced ease. "And you, friend, are lucky to be alive. That was a high-tier variant. We're calling them leapers. They're fast, strong, and highly aggressive. Most of what's left of the military has been overrun by them." "Leapers?"
I stared at her, then back down at the crumpled body of the businessman. They can jump across gaps like that? And climb walls like spiders if they're motivated, Thorne confirmed, her face grim. Evolution, my boy. Rapid, terrifying evolution. She stood, surveying the stairwell. Now, what are you doing in a place like this? And where were you heading? Sarah, I said, the name a desperate plea. My girlfriend. She works here. I was trying to find her. Thorne's expression softened, just slightly. I'm sorry, son. Most of the building was evacuated hours ago. Or rather, people tried. The ones who didn't get out early, well, they didn't make it. The whole upper half of this sector is swarming. My heart sank, a cold, heavy stone in my chest. But you're here. Why? I was trying to retrieve some data, Thorne said, her gaze drifting upward into the darker reaches of the stairwell. Information on the initial infection patterns. My lab was destroyed. This was one of the last major data centers still theoretically accessible. Clearly not as secure as I'd hoped. She paused, her eyes narrowing. But you're a data tech, aren't you? I saw your access card. Your building is practically a fortress. Why didn't you stay put? The Shamblers got inside, I explained, describing Mark, the speed, the raw aggression. He wasn't like the ones on TV. He was fast. He was smart. Thorne nodded slowly. Another variant then, or a prime. The first generation that got the full mutation. They're more powerful, more adaptable. Some even retain fragmented memories, a horrifying parody of their former selves. She shivered despite herself. These Shamblers, they aren't just mindless drones. They're becoming something truly monstrous. And that, my friend, is why global defenses couldn't hold. A new sound reached us, a distant, rhythmic thumping that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. It was coming from above, and it was growing louder. Thorne's eyes widened. They're coming, and that's not just a few leapers. That's a breach. She grabbed my arm. We need to move, now. Do you know where the service elevators are, or any uncompromised exits? My mind, still reeling, searched for answers. There's a maintenance tunnel in the basement, I stammered. Connects to the subway system. Could lead out of the city. Thorne's eyes lit up with a flicker of desperate hope. Subway? That's perfect. Underground, less exposure. Let's go. We'll head down.
But we have to be quick and quiet. The thumping intensified, joined by a low, guttural roar that seemed to vibrate through the very concrete of the building. They were closing in. The Leapers, the Primes, whatever horrifying mutated Shamblers were out there, they were here. And our desperate escape through the heart of a dying city was just beginning. My only choice was to trust this stranger, this Dr. Thorne, and pray we could somehow outrun the end of the world. We descended the stairwell, each step a descent deeper into the abyss of the city's collapse. The thumping above us grew into a thunderous roar, punctuated by the shattering of glass and the groan of tortured metal. It was clear the upper floors were completely compromised, a tide of mutated Shamblers pouring through, likely drawn by the previous gunshot. Thorne kept a hand on my arm, guiding me, her movements swift and silent despite the urgency. Her presence was a strange comfort, a small island of competence in an ocean of terror. My own arm throbbed where the leaper had scratched me, a constant reminder of how close I'd come. I tried not to think about it, to focus only on the next step, the next turn. The smell of decay thickened with every floor we dropped, mingling with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid scent of ozone from sparking electrical wires. The emergency lighting, where it still worked, flickered erratically, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that played tricks on my eyes, turning mundane objects into lurking threats. "How far down is this tunnel?" Thorne whispered, her voice tight with suppressed urgency as we reached the 10th floor. 3 more levels, I replied, my voice raspy. "Basement 2, it's behind the old boiler room." "Good," she breathed. "Sublevels are often overlooked. We might have a chance there." Her optimism, however faint, was contagious.
It gave me a small flicker of hope, a desperate push to keep moving. But the silence from below was just as unsettling as the cacophony above. Too quiet. A stillness that suggested something was waiting. My heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I clutched the crowbar, its weight both reassuring and terrifyingly inadequate. We passed a doorway on the 8th floor that had been forced open, leading into a darkened office space. A brief, horrifying glimpse showed overturned cubicles, scattered files, and dark, sticky trails on the carpet. My stomach lurched. I quickly averted my gaze, forcing myself to look straight ahead. No time to dwell on the tragedies that had unfolded here. At the 5th floor, we heard it. A low, wet cough from below. Thorn froze, pulling me back into the shadows of the stairwell corner. Her hand instinctively went to her holstered pistol.
Her eyes, usually so sharp, were narrowed, searching the gloom beneath us. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely a tremor. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Not a shambler, not typical anyway. Too human, but that doesn't mean it's friendly." The cough came again, closer this time, followed by a soft shuffle of feet. Someone was down there. Someone or something was moving. My mind raced. Other survivors or something worse? The mutated Shamblers weren't the only threat anymore. Desperate people could be just as dangerous. "Stay here," Thorn murmured, pulling her pistol. "I'll check." "No," I hissed, grabbing her arm. "2 pairs of eyes are better than 1, and I have the crowbar." I was terrified, but the thought of letting her go alone into that unknown darkness was worse. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, a grim acceptance. We descended cautiously, each step taken with agonizing slowness. The air grew heavier, cooler, the metallic tang of blood stronger. The silence stretched, amplifying every creak of the building, every beat of my own frantic heart. The cough came again, from the 3rd floor landing. It sounded labored, wet. As we rounded the turn, the source of the sound came into view. A man, slumped against the wall, covered in dirt and blood. He was thin, emaciated, his eyes sunken, but they held a spark of life, of terror. He clutched a dirty rag to his mouth, which was stained dark. "Help," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "Please, I'm sick." Thorn held her pistol steady, her face unreadable. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Been down here for days," he choked out, another rattling cough tearing through him. "Hiding. It's getting worse. The fever." He trailed off, his eyes darting to my crowbar, then to Thorn's pistol. Are you safe?" My gaze fell to his bare arm. A series of dark, angry bite marks, already festering, were visible just above his elbow. My stomach lurched. This wasn't just sickness. This was infection. Thorn saw it too. Her face hardened. "He's infected," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "That cough, it's the later stages. His lungs are failing." The man's eyes, full of desperate hope just a moment before, clouded with despair. "No," he whispered. "No, I'm not. I got cut. It's just a fever." He looked at us, pleading. "Please, don't leave me. I can help. I know the tunnels." My heart ached for him. His terror was palpable, his denial heartbreaking. But I'd seen Mark. I'd seen what happened. I knew what he was becoming. The mutation of the Shamblers wasn't just external. It consumed you from the inside out. Thorn raised her pistol. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice flat.
"I can't risk it. No," the man screamed, a sudden surge of strength in his voice, his eyes widening in primal fear. "Please, don't. I have a family. I'm not one of them." He tried to push himself up, hands outstretched. I reacted instinctively, a wave of raw terror washing over me. This was the moment I had to make an impossible choice. He was a human, begging for his life. But he was also a ticking time bomb. "Wait," I choked out, pushing Thorn's arm down. "He's still human. Give him a chance." Thorn looked at me, her eyes unblinking. "A chance to turn and kill us? I'm sorry, but we don't have that luxury anymore. This isn't a world for second chances, not for this." The man was struggling to his feet, a pathetic, desperate attempt to escape. His movements were growing more erratic, his eyes starting to glaze over, the infection taking hold. The coughing intensified, a wet, rattling sound, and a fresh stream of black fluid dribbled from his mouth. "He's turning," Thorn said, her voice low and grim. "Look at his eyes." I looked. The man's eyes, just moments ago filled with pleading, now held something else. Something empty, something hungry. His hands were still reaching, but not for help now. For us. My stomach clenched. This was the moment. The horrifying reality of the Shambler mutation and its merciless spread. Global defenses couldn't hold, not only because of the monsters, but because of the impossible choices survivors were forced to make. "I can't," I whispered, my voice thick with horror. Thorn didn't hesitate. She raised her pistol, aimed for his head, and fired. The shot cracked through the stairwell, deafening. The man stumbled, convulsed, then dropped to the ground, a fresh pool of crimson blooming beneath his head. He lay still, his eyes wide and vacant, no longer pleading, no longer threatening, just empty. My hands trembled violently. I had watched her kill him, a human being begging for his life, and I had done nothing. It was a cold, brutal reality, a stark lesson in the new rules of survival. Thorn turned to me, her face grim. "Survival, son, is a brutal game. We can't afford sentimentality, not anymore." She met my gaze, and in her eyes I saw not cruelty, but a terrible, weary resolve. He was going to turn, and then he would have been a danger to us, to anyone he met. It was an act of mercy, for him and for ourselves. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the bile rising in my throat. I knew she was right, logically, but emotionally it tore at me. The monster wasn't just outside anymore. It was in the choices we had to make, in the very core of our humanity. "Now," Thorn said, her voice firm, pulling me back to the present terror. "Let's keep moving. That gunshot will have drawn attention."
We don't have much time before more of them find us. The thumping from above was still distant, but it was accompanied by a low, guttural chorus now. A wave of sounds, like a pack of hunting animals. And the quiet from below was still a profound, unsettling void. We had escaped the upper floors, but the basement, with its promise of a tunnel to freedom, held its own unknown horrors. My legs felt like lead, my heart heavy with the weight of the man we'd left behind. This new world was forcing me to confront unthinkable realities, and the descent into the subway, the last desperate hope, suddenly felt like a descent into deeper hell. The air in the lower levels of the building was thick with the scent of stagnant water and mildew, a damp chill seeping into my bones. Every echo of our footsteps, every drip of water from unseen pipes seemed magnified in the oppressive silence. Thorn moved with a predatory grace, her pistol leading the way, eyes constantly sweeping the shadows. I followed, crowbar gripped tight, my gaze darting nervously from side to side, half expecting a new horror to spring from the gloom. The memory of the man on the stairs, his pleading eyes, his violent end, played on an endless loop in my mind. It was a terrible reminder of the cost of survival. We reached basement level 1. It was a cavernous space filled with abandoned crates, obsolete machinery, and the husks of old filing cabinets. Dust motes danced in the sparse light filtering in from grimy vents high up near the ceiling, creating hazy shafts of light that illuminated nothing but deeper shadows. The walls were stained with moisture, and the air was heavy, tasting of earth and forgotten things. "Maintenance access should be on basement 2, I whispered,
my voice feeling impossibly loud in the vast emptiness. Past the old boiler room. Thorn nodded, her expression grim. The deeper we go, the less likely we are to encounter Shamblers, she murmured, but the more likely we are to find whatever else hides in the dark. Her words hung in the air, a chilling premonition. The mutated Shamblers weren't the only threat, and the city's forgotten underbelly could hold its own unique horrors. The global defenses couldn't hold, not just against the infected, but against the breakdown of society itself and the predators that would rise in its wake. We found the stairwell leading to basement 2. It was even darker, the emergency lights completely out. Thorn produced a small tactical flashlight from her jacket, its beam cutting a thin, fragile path through the oppressive blackness. The air grew colder, heavier, smelling of decay and damp concrete. As we descended, a new sound reached us, a low, rhythmic thump scrape. It was faint, but constant, like something dragging itself through the darkness. My blood ran cold. "What is that?" I whispered, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Thorn's face was unreadable in the dim light, but her grip on her pistol tightened. "Stay close," she instructed, her voice barely a whisper. "And be ready." We reached the bottom of the stairs, basement 2. The air here was almost suffocating, thick with the smell of stagnant water, and something else, something metallic and sweet that turned my stomach. The thump scrape was louder now, coming from further down the corridor, deeper into the dark. The beam of Thorn's flashlight danced across the corridor, revealing pipes snaking across the ceiling, their surfaces glistening with condensation. Old electrical conduits, some snapped and sparking faintly, hissed and crackled. It was a true labyrinth, a forgotten underbelly of the city. We moved forward, slow, deliberate steps. Each thump scrape reverberated through the concrete floor, a chilling cadence in the darkness. My mind raced, trying to conjure an image of what could make such a sound. A large shambler, dragging a limb? Or something far more monstrous. The mutation of these creatures seemed to defy all logic, making every assumption a potential death trap. We reached a junction. To the left, a series of service rooms. To the right, a long, narrow corridor leading into deeper darkness. The thump scrape was coming from the right. "Boiler room is that way," I pointed, my voice barely above a whisper, towards the right. Thorn nodded, her face grim. "Keep your eyes peeled, and if you see it, don't scream, just point, and then get ready to run or fight." Her words were a stark reminder of the desperate situation we were in. We crept down the corridor, the air growing thick with the metallic tang of blood. The thump scrape was now accompanied by a wet sucking sound, and a low, rasping breath. Whatever it was massive, and it was close. Thorn raised her pistol, her arm steady. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping the corridor ahead. And then, it found it. My breath hitched. My blood ran cold. My mind screamed in disbelief. It was immense. At least 8 feet tall, its body grotesquely swollen, covered in dark, leathery skin. One of its legs was missing, leaving a pulpy stump that scraped against the concrete with each thump scrape. Its arms were grotesquely long, ending in massive clawed hands that dragged along the floor, leaving deep gouges in the concrete. Its head was a misshapen mass, no discernible features, just a gaping maw filled with rows of jagged teeth, constantly opening and closing with that wet sucking sound. Its eyes, if it had any, were hidden beneath folds of thick, scarred tissue.
This was no ordinary Shambler. This was a new mutation, a nightmare given form. It was slowly, painfully dragging itself towards us, drawn by what? Our scent? Our warmth? Our fear? Thorn cursed under her breath, a low, savage sound. "A juggernaut," she whispered, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and grim recognition. "I've heard rumors. They're rare, almost impossible to kill.
immune to small arms fire. And they're not just aggressive, they're territorial. They protect something. The juggernaut paused, its misshapen head tilting slightly as if sensing our presence. Its rasping breath grew louder, heavier. The air grew cold, as if radiating its own deathly chill. "The tunnel," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It's past him." Thorn matted, her jaw set. "We're not going to fight that thing head on," she said, her voice firm. "We need to lure it, bypass it, distract it." My eyes darted around the corridor, desperate for an idea. Pipes, conduits, abandoned maintenance equipment. Nothing big enough, nothing powerful enough to stop that behemoth. The juggernaut took another laborious thump-scrape step, closer. The ground vibrated with its weight. It let out a low, guttural roar that echoed through the tunnel, shaking dust from the pipes above. It knew we were here. It was challenging us. Thorn pulled a flare from a pocket in her tactical vest. "Hold this," she said, handing it to me. "When I say, aim for that side tunnel, there." She pointed to a narrow, dark opening about 20 yards down the corridor, perpendicular to the juggernaut's path. "It's a dead end, but it might distract it long enough." "What are you going to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Make some noise," she said grimly, and without another word, she sprinted forward, away from the juggernaut, towards a stack of rusted metal barrels piled high against the wall. She moved with surprising speed, a blur in the dim light. The juggernaut turned its massive head, its entire body slowly swiveling towards the sound of her movement. Its rasping breath intensified. Thorn reached the barrels, and with a grunt, she kicked the bottom one. It clattered loudly, knocking over the entire stack with a deafening crash that reverberated through the corridor. The juggernaut roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. It turned fully, its misshapen body now facing the source of the noise, its massive claws scraping against the concrete as it slowly began to shift its immense bulk towards the barrels. "Now!" Thorn screamed, her voice cutting through the juggernaut's roar. My hands trembled, but I lit the flare, the chemical smell acrid in my nostrils. With a desperate heave, I threw it. It sailed through the air, a flaming comet in the darkness, and landed with a hiss deep inside the side tunnel Thorn had pointed to. The flare sputtered, casting a crimson glow into the dead end. The juggernaut paused, its head swiveling, trying to process the two sudden loud noises. It let out a frustrated bellow, then slowly, agonizingly, began to drag itself towards the flickering red light of the flare. The thump scrape was now directed away from our path. "Go!" Thorn yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me forward, "while it's distracted." We sprinted past the juggernaut, our footsteps echoing loudly in the sudden, terrifying quiet. I glanced back, seeing its massive form bathed in the pulsing red light of the flare, its claws still scraping the concrete as it slowly, inexorably moved towards the dead end. It was so agonizingly slow, but its bulk was so immense, so utterly unstoppable. This was the raw power of the mutation, a chilling testament to why global defenses couldn't hold. They weren't fighting humans, they were fighting forces of nature, perverted by a terrifying disease. We ran, our lungs burning, our legs screaming in protest. The sound of the juggernaut's frustrated roars faded behind us as we plunged deeper into the network of tunnels. The air grew stale, heavy, and a new, unsettling smell filled my nostrils. The smell of the subway system. A strange blend of ozone, damp earth, and something undeniably metallic. We were moving away from the building, away from the city above, into a new, unknown threat, guided only by desperate hope. The tunnel ahead was a black maw, swallowing Thorn's flashlight beam whole. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm against the chilling silence that had replaced the juggernaut's roars. The air was thick with the distinct odor of the subway, metallic, damp, and oddly sterile, a stark contrast to the putrid decay of the world above. Each step we took echoed in the vast emptiness, a terrifying reminder of our vulnerability. "Where exactly does this lead?" Thorn whispered, her voice tight as we navigated a labyrinth of pipes and conduits. "It should connect to a service line," I replied, my voice hoarse. "From there, we can hopefully get to the main subway tunnels. There's an old abandoned station a few stops out. If we can reach that, we might be able to find a way out of the city." The plan felt flimsy, built on a string of ifs, but it was the only plan we had. The tunnel walls were rough-hewn concrete, patched with ancient, rusted metal plates. Water dripped steadily from overhead, forming small puddles on the ground that shimmered ominously in Thorn's flashlight beam. My mind raced, trying to remember the complex layout of the old subway system, a place I'd only ever heard rumors about. The weight of our survival suddenly felt immense, resting squarely on my shoulders. We continued, moving as silently as possible. The darkness pressed in on us, heavy and suffocating. My mind conjured images of unseen horrors lurking in the shadows, of new mutated Shamblers adapted to the subterranean environment. Were there blind variants, those that hunted by sound or smell alone? The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. The lack of information, the suddenness of the Shambler mutation, was truly why global defenses couldn't hold. They were fighting an enemy that rewrote the rules with every passing hour. A low scraping sound from ahead made us both freeze. Thorn raised her pistol, her beam cutting through the darkness, but revealing nothing. The scraping stopped. My breath hitched, caught in my throat. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Thorn nodded, her eyes narrowed, scanning the blackness. "Ambush point," she murmured. "Something's waiting." We moved forward with excruciating slowness, every nerve ending screaming. The scraping sound returned, closer now, accompanied by a soft, almost chitinous clicking. My stomach clenched. This didn't sound like a Shambler. This sounded like an insect. A very large, very aggressive insect. The flashlight beam finally illuminated the source of the sound. My blood ran cold. It was unlike anything I had seen before. A grotesque fusion of a human and something arthropodal. Its skin was dry, papery, the color of old parchment, but its limbs were elongated, jointed, covered in a brittle, chitinous armor. Its head was small, tucked into its hunched shoulders, but its eyes glowed with a faint, predatory green light, like an insect. It had 4 long, slender limbs, tipped with wicked-looking claws, which it used to scuttle along the tunnel floor with astonishing speed, making that unsettling clicking sound. It was feeding on something, a dark, mangled mass on the ground. "A crawler," Thorn breathed, her voice filled with a new kind of dread. "They call them crawlers, another mutation. They're attracted to the damp, the dark. They hunt in packs." My mind reeled. Pack hunting? Green eyes? This wasn't just a zombie apocalypse anymore. This was a whole new ecosystem of nightmare. The speed with which these things had mutated, the diversity of their forms, it explained everything. Global defenses couldn't hold because they were fighting a hydra, cutting off one head only for 2 new, more terrifying ones to grow in its place. The crawler paused its feeding, its head snapping up, its green eyes locking onto us. It let out a high-pitched, chittering shriek that echoed off the tunnel walls, a sound that made my teeth ache. "Move!" Thorn yelled, firing her pistol. The shot cracked, echoing deafeningly, but the crawler moved with impossible speed, a blur of motion. The bullet ricocheted off the tunnel wall behind it, sending sparks flying. The crawler was too fast, its chitinous shell perhaps deflecting the shot. It scuttled towards us, a horrifying multi-legged blur, its claws scraping against the concrete, its green eyes burning with malevolent hunger. "This way!" Thorn shouted, pulling me into a side tunnel, a narrower, even darker passage. "They prefer wider spaces." We plunged into the side tunnel, scrambling over loose rocks and debris. The chittering shriek of the crawler echoed behind us, growing closer. Its long, jointed limbs clattered on the concrete, a terrifying drumbeat of impending doom. What are they sensitive to? I gasped, my lungs burning, my legs screaming for me to stop. Light! Fire! Thorn yelled back, her voice strained. But we don't have enough to stop them all. There'll be more. She was right. The chittering was multiplying, a cacophony of alien sounds. Other crawlers were joining the hunt, drawn by the first one's shriek. The very air vibrated with their hungry clicks and rustles. We burst into a wider chamber, a junction point in the old subway service lines. Railroad tracks, rusted and overgrown with mildew, stretched into the gloom. My heart leaped. This was it, the main line. But as Thorn's flashlight beam swept across the chamber, it illuminated a horrifying tableau. Dozens of crawlers, clinging to the walls, scuttling over the rusted trains, their green eyes glowing in the darkness. A silent, terrifying legion. They had been waiting. They had been lurking in the shadows, perfectly camouflaged against the grime. And now they were all turning towards us, their collective chittering growing into a deafening roar. My blood ran cold. This was an ambush, a trap. No, I whispered, the word ripped from my throat, raw with despair. There are too many. Thorn swore under her breath, pulling a small cylindrical object from her vest, a flashbang. "Get down!" she screamed, throwing it. The flashbang exploded with a blinding white light and a deafening bang that reverberated through the tunnel, making my ears ring. I instinctively squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my hands against my head. When I opened them again, blinking away the spots, the crawlers were in disarray. Their glowing green eyes were blinking frantically. Their chittering had turned into confused, panicked clicks. They were disoriented, temporarily blinded by the sudden light. "Now," Thorn yelled, grabbing my arm, "the tracks!"
"We've run down the tracks!" We sprinted onto the rusted tracks, our feet slipping on the slick metal and gravel. The stench of ozone and damp earth was overpowering here, mingling with the acrid scent of the crawlers. Behind us, their chittering slowly began to reorganize, their green eyes regaining their focus, turning back towards us. They were recovering, fast. "How long will that hold them?" I gasped, my lungs burning. "Not long enough," Thorn replied, pulling me faster. "They adapt quickly. The mutation has given them an incredible resistance to sensory overload. We need to find shelter, fast." The track stretched into an endless black tunnel, the faint outline of the next station barely visible in the far distance. It seemed miles away. We were running a race against a relentlessly evolving nightmare, against creatures that were growing smarter, faster, more terrifying with every passing second. Global defenses couldn't hold because they weren't fighting for time. They were fighting against evolution itself. And evolution was winning. And our desperate dash into the heart of the subway system, into the unknown, was our only chance. My only hope for survival was to outrun the end of the world. The rusted track stretched before us, a grim path into the unknown, each step echoing in the cavernous darkness of the subway tunnel. The air was heavy, cloying, thick with the scent of damp earth, mildew, and the metallic tang of old iron. Behind us, the chittering of the crawlers grew louder, a chilling symphony of predatory hunger, punctuated by the frantic clicks of their jointed limbs scuttling across the concrete. Thorn, despite her age, kept an impressive pace, her breath coming in ragged gasps but never faltering. Her determination was a beacon in the oppressive gloom, a fragile spark of hope. My own lungs burned, each breath a painful rasp. My legs screamed in protest, but I pushed through the exhaustion, fueled by sheer, unadulterated terror. The thought of those glowing green eyes, those wicked claws, propelled me forward. These mutated Shamblers weren't just a threat. They were a persistent, evolving nightmare that understood strategy, that hunted in packs, and that learned from every encounter. Global defenses couldn't hold, not just against numbers, but against an enemy that defied categorization, that constantly shifted its form and its tactics. How much further to the next station? Thorn gasped, her voice strained. Maybe half a mile, I replied, the words torn from my throat. It's an abandoned line, should be clearer. My hope was a desperate gamble, but we had nowhere else to go. The tunnel walls were scarred with graffiti, faded and peeling, ghostly remnants of a world that no longer existed.
Old electrical conduits, some snapped and sparking faintly, snaked along the ceiling, offering a fleeting, eerie light. The silence, when the crawler's chittering momentarily receded, was deafening, making the thumping of my own heart reverberate in my ears. Suddenly, the tunnel ahead was filled with a blinding flash of light. A train, or what looked like a train. Not moving, but parked, its headlamps still blazing, illuminating the tracks ahead. My heart leaped with a desperate, foolish hope. A shelter, a means of escape? But then I saw the other lights, dozens of them, small, red, flickering, like eyes. And the shadows they cast were wrong, too tall, too gaunt, too still. "Stop!" Thorn yelled, pulling me to a halt. "Look!" The beam of her flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing them. Shamblers. Not crawlers, but the tall, gaunt, familiar, yet terrifyingly mutated kind. Hundreds of them, packed into the abandoned train, clinging to the walls of the tunnel, standing motionless on the tracks like grotesque statues. They were all facing the light of the train's headlamps, their bodies bathed in its harsh glow, completely still. Their red eyes glowed with an internal, malevolent light, like embers in a dying fire. "What are they doing?" I whispered, my voice choked with dread. Thorn's face was pale in the beam of her light. "They're dormant," she breathed, her voice filled with a terrible understanding. "The stalkers, another mutation. They react to movement, sound. But in the presence of strong, continuous light, they go into a dormant state. They're drawn to it, held by it." My blood ran cold. Drawn to it, held by it, like moths to a flame, but with a horrifying, predatory twist. They were patiently waiting, like spiders in a web, for anything to break the light, to make a sound, to move. This was a death trap. A silent, waiting, horrifying death trap. The mutation was not just about speed and strength. It was about insidious, terrifying adaptability. Global defenses couldn't hold because the enemy had learned to camouflage itself, to wait, to blend into the very fabric of the new apocalypse. Behind us, the chittering of the crawlers was growing louder, closer. They were no longer disoriented. They were hunting, and we were trapped between two terrifying mutated variants of Shamblers. "We can't go forward," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "And we can't go back." Thorn's eyes swept the tunnel, desperately searching. Her gaze fell on the train. The old, abandoned train with its blazing headlamps. "The train," she muttered, a desperate idea forming. "If we can get inside, we might be able to find a way to redirect the light or something." "It's full of them," I protested, gesturing to the hundreds of dormant stalkers. "They're dormant," Thorn countered, her voice firm. "They won't react unless we make a sound or break the light. We need to be silent and careful." My mind screamed against the insanity of it. Walking into a train packed with hundreds of motionless, deadly creatures? It was suicide. But what other choice did we have? Behind us, the chittering of the crawlers was a relentless, ever-approaching threat. "Okay," I said, my voice shaking. "Okay, but how do we get past them?" Thorn pointed to a narrow gap between the side of the train and the tunnel wall. "We hug the wall, move slowly, silently. Do not make a sound. Do not touch anything, and pray." The plan was terrifying in its simplicity. We would walk a tightrope of death past a horde of dormant monsters, praying that a single misstep, a single breath, wouldn't awaken them. We began our agonizing traverse. Each step was a silent prayer, each breath a carefully measured intake of air. The glare of the headlamps was blinding, painting the stalkers in stark relief. Their gaunt forms, their withered clothes, their red, glowing eyes staring into nothingness. They were so close I could almost touch them.
My skin crawled with revulsion and fear. I saw a child-sized stalker, its face frozen in a silent scream. A woman, her hair still pulled back in a tidy bun. A businessman, his suit still mostly intact. Ghosts of a past that had been brutally ripped away, now twisted into horrific waiting monsters. The sheer scale of the tragedy, the suddenness with which entire lives had been erased, pressed down on me. This was why global defenses couldn't hold, not against a tide of suffering that consumed everything, even the very essence of humanity. The chittering of the crawlers behind us was growing louder, a constant nagging reminder that our window of opportunity was rapidly closing. I could feel their presence, a creeping dread crawling up my spine. We were halfway along the train when I heard it. A small, almost imperceptible creak. My heart leaped into my throat. Thorn froze, her eyes wide, staring at a stalker that stood impossibly close, its glowing red eyes just inches from my face. Had it heard? Had it moved? The stalker twitched. Just a small, almost imperceptible shudder. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Then its head snapped to the side, away from us, toward the crawlers. And the chittering behind us stopped. An unnerving silence fell over the tunnel, thick and heavy, broken only by the distant, sporadic drips of water. The stalkers remained dormant, frozen in the glare of the headlamps, but the crawlers, those agile, pack-hunting insectoids, had gone completely silent. Thorn pulled me forward, her grip on my arm like a vice.
"Something's wrong," she whispered, her voice tight with a new kind of fear. "They shouldn't have stopped, not like that." We reached the end of the train, the dormant stalkers still eerily silent. The next section of the tunnel was pitch black, a welcome contrast to the blinding glare of the headlamps. We ducked into its shadows, Thorn's flashlight beam once again our only guide. But the silence was unnerving. The crawlers, those relentless, chittering hunters, had vanished. The stalkers remained in their light-induced stupor. It was an unnatural quiet, a calm before a different storm. "They're gone," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "The crawlers." Thorn nodded, her face grim. "Too quiet. They're not gone. They're hiding. Or they're waiting for something else, something worse." She swept her flashlight beam around the dark tunnel, her eyes narrowed. The mutation isn't just about evolving individual traits. It's about evolving interaction. They learn from each other. They cooperate. My stomach churned. The idea of these mutated shamblers, these diverse, terrifying variants, working together, coordinating their hunts, it was a nightmare far beyond anything I had ever contemplated. This was truly why global defenses couldn't hold. The enemy wasn't just individual monsters. It was a collective, adaptable, evolving intelligence of horror. We moved deeper into the dark tunnel, my crowbar ready, Thorn's pistol raised. The next station, our desperate hope, felt impossibly far away. And the unnerving silence behind us, where the crawlers had vanished, spoke of a new, unseen threat, patiently waiting to strike. This subway system, once a symbol of connection, was now a labyrinth of evolving nightmares, and our survival hung by the thinnest of threads. The oppressive darkness of the tunnel swallowed us whole, Thorn's flashlight beam cutting a fragile path through the heavy, stale air. The silence that followed the abrupt disappearance of the crawlers was more terrifying than their chittering. It was a predatory silence, a held breath before the next pounce. My mind screamed at the thought of them lurking just beyond the reach of the light, their green eyes now invisible, their jointed limbs poised to strike. This new level of mutation, their apparent ability to coordinate, to ambush, was truly why global defenses couldn't hold. Humanity was not just outgunned, it was outthought. We continued our agonizing march along the tracks, our footsteps muffled by the gravel and dust.
The rusted rails gleamed faintly in the shifting beam of light, leading us deeper into the bowels of the earth. My arm throbbed from the leaper's scratches, a constant dull ache that served as a physical manifestation of the terror clawing at my soul.
"How far to the abandoned station?" Thorn whispered, her voice tight, her eyes constantly sweeping the darkness. "It should be just ahead, another quarter mile maybe," I replied, my voice hoarse, the words catching in my throat. My memory of the old subway maps was hazy at best, a relic from a world that had crumbled in a single terrifying day. Suddenly, a new smell hit me. Not the decay of the Shamblers, nor the damp earth of the subway. This was something industrial, something burning, something chemical. My gut twisted with a fresh wave of dread. "What is that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Thorn's face hardened. Fire. And something else. Not wood. Chemicals. Her flashlight beam found its source. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a wider cavern, and a faint orange glow pulsed from within. The source of the burning smell. As we drew closer, the scene that unfolded before us stole my breath. It was the abandoned station, or what was left of it. The platform was a ruin, littered with charred debris. The air was thick with smoke, stinging my eyes and burning my lungs. And in the center of the platform, a grotesque bonfire raged. Not of wood, not of garbage, of bodies. Human bodies, piled high, slowly burning, their forms twisting and charring in the intense heat. And among them, something else, something larger. The distinct leathery skin of a juggernaut. Its immense bulk slowly disintegrating in the flames, adding to the horrific chemical stench. My stomach lurched. "My God," I whispered, turning away, the image seared into my mind. Who would do this? Who would burn so many bodies? "A containment effort," Thorn said, her voice grim but devoid of surprise. "Or what's left of one. They tried to burn the infected out, a desperate last-ditch effort." Her eyes swept the scene, calculating. "But it's not just the dead. Look." I forced myself to look again. Through the smoke, I saw them. Not the stalkers, not the crawlers, but another, even more terrifying mutation. Figures, humanoid, but impossibly thin, almost skeletal, their skin stretched taut over sharp bones. Their movements were jerky, spasmodic, as if controlled by unseen strings. They moved with an unnerving, almost ritualistic slowness, gathering more bodies, more debris, adding them to the pyre. Their eyes were not glowing red, nor predatory green. They were milky white, utterly blank, yet they moved with a coordinated purpose. And from their mouths, no roars, no chittering, just a low, constant, keening wail that pierced the soul. "The mourners," Thorn breathed, her voice filled with a profound sadness. "They're drawn to death, to suffering. They don't attack directly. They consume. They burn. They spread the ash as if in some twisted ceremony." My blood ran cold. This was a nightmare far beyond anything I could have ever conceived. Not just fast, strong, intelligent Shamblers, but specialized variants. Hunters, lurkers, even what appear to be mournful, ritualistic guardians of the dead. This was the ultimate terror of the Shambler mutation, its horrifying diversity, its adaptability. Global defenses couldn't hold because they weren't fighting one enemy, but an entire evolving ecosystem of death. "We can't go through there," I whispered, pulling back into the shadows of the tunnel. They're burning everything, and there are so many." Indeed, the platform was teeming with mourners, their keening wails blending into a haunting chorus. Their blank eyes seemed to gaze into some unseen void, their skeletal hands slowly piling more bodies onto the pyre. It was a scene of unspeakable horror, made even worse by their unnerving, almost ritualistic behavior. Thorn pulled me back, her face etched with grim determination. "No, we can't, but there has to be another way through.
An old maintenance access, a side tunnel. The subway system is a spider web. She swept her flashlight beam along the tunnel walls, searching frantically. The heat from the burning pyre was intense, pushing a wave of scorching air towards us, carrying with it the sickening smell of charred flesh and chemicals. The smoke swirled, making it difficult to breathe, stinging my eyes. I felt a wave of nausea threatening to overwhelm me. Up there, I pointed, my voice hoarse. A small, almost imperceptible opening high up on the tunnel wall, above the tracks. It looked like an old service duct, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. Thorne's eyes lit up. Good eye, kid. That's our shot. But it's a climb. The sound of chittering, faint but distinct, reached us from the tunnel behind. The crawlers. They hadn't vanished. They had just been silent, biding their time. And now they were back. Drawn perhaps by the light of the pyre or the screams from the burning bodies. They were relentless. They're coming, I breathed, pointing back down the tunnel. Thorne nodded, already assessing the climb. We need to move. There's a ladder, a maintenance ladder, a bit further down the tracks. We can use that. We started moving towards the ladder, keeping low, trying to stay hidden in the shadows. But the glow from the burning station cast our forms in stark relief. The mourners, oblivious to our presence, continued their macabre ritual, their keening wails echoing through the cavern. The chittering of the crawlers grew louder, closer, now accompanied by the unmistakable sound of their claws scraping against the concrete. They were no longer silent. They were hunting. They're coming, I breathed, pointing back down the tunnel. Thorne nodded, already assessing the climb. We need to move. There's a ladder, a maintenance ladder, a bit further down the tracks. We can use that. We started moving towards the ladder, keeping low, trying to stay hidden in the shadows. But the glow from the burning station cast our forms in stark relief. The mourners, oblivious to our presence, continued their macabre ritual, their keening wails echoing through the cavern. The chittering of the crawlers grew louder, closer, now accompanied by the unmistakable sound of their claws scraping against the concrete. They were no longer silent. They were hunting. They're coming, I breathed, pointing back down the tunnel. Thorne nodded, already assessing the climb. We need to move. There's a ladder, a maintenance ladder, a bit further down the tracks. We can use that. We started moving towards the ladder, keeping low, trying to stay hidden in the shadows. But the glow from the burning station cast our forms in stark relief. The mourners, oblivious to our presence, continued their macabre ritual, their keening wails echoing through the cavern. The chittering of the crawlers grew louder, closer, now accompanied by the unmistakable sound of their claws scraping against the concrete. They were no longer silent. They were hunting. We reached the ladder, a rusted iron structure bolted to the tunnel wall.
Thorne was already scaling it, her movements quick and agile. "Go," she urged, her voice strained. "Hurry!" I scrambled up after her, my muscles screaming in protest, the crowbar awkwardly banging against the ladder rungs. My hands, still slick with sweat and the residue of Mark's ichor, struggled to maintain their grip. Below, the red glow of the crawler's eyes was growing larger, dozens of them scuttling towards us with terrifying speed. A crawler, impossibly fast, launched itself at the ladder. Its claws scraped against the metal just inches from my foot. I screamed, scrambling higher, my heart leaping into my throat. Thorne, already at the top, reached down, grabbing my arm, pulling me with surprising strength. I squeezed through the narrow opening, scraping my shoulders and back against the rough concrete. The tunnel was dark, even narrower than the service duct, filled with the claustrophobic scent of dry dust and metal. Thorne pulled a small headlamp from her pocket, clicking it on, its beam illuminating a tight, winding path. Behind us, the chittering of the crawlers was muffled but insistent. They were trying to get through the opening. We could hear their frustrated clicks, the scraping of their claws against the concrete. They wouldn't give up easily. "This is a ventilation shaft," Thorne whispered, her voice tight. "Old, probably leads out to a vent cover on the surface, hopefully away from the city center."
We crawled, inch by agonizing inch through the confined space. The air was thick with dust, making me cough, the sound echoing ominously. Every creak of the old metal, every shift of a loose rock made me jump. My mind raced, imagining the crawlers chewing their way through the concrete, their green eyes burning with hunger. The mutation had truly created a monster for every environment. The surface, I thought, a desperate prayer. Fresh air, sunlight, a world without these things. But even as the thought formed, a cold certainty settled in my gut. This Shambler mutation wasn't confined to the city. It was global. And even if we reached the surface, what horrors would await us there? The knowledge that global defenses couldn't hold meant the world was forever changed, and our journey was far from over. Our only hope was to keep moving, keep fighting, and pray that somewhere, out there, a shred of humanity still remained. The ventilation shaft was a claustrophobic nightmare, a tight, winding metal tube that smelled of stale air and rust. Every movement scraped against the corrugated metal, sending rattling echoes that bounced off the confined walls, amplifying the already deafening pounding of my heart.
Thorn, ahead of me, crawled with a quiet determination, her headlamp casting a small, flickering circle of light that was our entire world. My shoulders screamed in protest, my knees ached, and the phantom sensation of crawler claws scraping at my heels was a constant, terrifying companion. "How much further?" I rasped, the dust making my throat burn. "Hard to say," Thorn replied, her voice muffled by the confined space. "These shafts twist and turn, but it should lead to the surface, away from direct city contact, hopefully." Her hope, however small, was a fragile anchor in the sea of my despair. The air grew progressively thicker with dust and the cloying scent of something metallic, as if the very air was oxidizing around us. My mind conjured images of the crawler pack, relentlessly pursuing us, their chittering forms already squeezing through the narrow opening we'd just escaped. The thought propelled me forward, pushing through the pain and the suffocating fear. This Shambler mutation had given them an unholy persistence, a single-minded drive that defied logic. Global defenses couldn't hold because they were fighting creatures that simply refused to give up, that relentlessly hunted until their prey was consumed. Suddenly, Thorn stopped. Her headlamp beam, instead of illuminating more cramped tunnel, now showed a solid sheet of rusted metal. A vent cover. "We're here," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and trepidation. "The surface." My breath hitched. Freedom, or a new, unknown hell. Thorn began to inspect the vent cover, running her gloved hands over its surface, testing its seals, checking for bolts. It was old, corroded, but still firmly in place. "Looks like it's been sealed for a while," she murmured. "Good. Means it's likely undisturbed." I pulled out my crowbar, its length unwieldy in the narrow shaft. "Can we pry it open?" "Might be bolted from the outside," Thorn replied, her brow furrowed. "Or just rusted solid. Either way, we'll have to make some noise." Her gaze met mine, grim. "Are you ready?" Ready? Ready to face whatever fresh horror awaited us on the surface? Ready to make noise that would inevitably draw every nearby mutated Shambler to our position? My stomach clenched. No, but I had no choice. "Ready," I lied, my voice trembling but firm. Thorn braced herself, positioning the crowbar against the edge of the vent cover. She grunted, putting her weight into it, trying to leverage it open. The metal groaned, a sickening, drawn-out sound that echoed deafeningly in the confined space. And then we heard it, a high-pitched, piercing shriek from above us, from the surface. My blood ran cold. It wasn't the chittering of crawlers. It wasn't the mournful wail of the mourners. It was a new sound. A sound of raw, unbridled aggression. A sound that spoke of something truly terrifying. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice choked with terror. Thorn pulled back from the vent cover, her face pale in the flickering beam of her headlamp.
Another one, she breathed. A screamer. They use sonic attacks to disorient and draw in other Shamblers. They're often found with pack leaders, the ones with advanced coordination. My mind reeled. Screamers. Pack leaders. The Shambler mutation was more organized, more diverse than I could have ever imagined. It truly explained why global defenses couldn't hold. They weren't fighting against mindless hordes. They were fighting against an evolving, tactical enemy. The shriek came again, closer this time, and even more piercing. It vibrated through the metal of the shaft, rattling my teeth, sending a wave of nausea washing over me. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it did little to dull the sound. My head throbbed, my vision blurred at the edges. "It knows we're here," Thorn gritted out, her own face contorted in pain from the sonic assault. "It heard the vent cover. It's calling the others." We were trapped in a metal tube, deafened by a monstrous shriek, with a growing horde of mutated Shamblers converging on our position. Thorn grabbed the crowbar, her movements desperate. "We have to get out, now!" She slammed the crowbar against the vent cover, not prying, but hammering, trying to smash it open. Each clang was deafening, a direct challenge to the screamer above. The screamer responded with another shriek, even louder, even more painful. I felt a sharp stabbing pain behind my eyes, and my ears rang so violently I thought my eardrums would burst. My vision swam, and I felt myself collapsing, my body screaming in protest. "Fight it!" Thorn yelled, her voice barely audible through the sonic assault. "Focus! We have to break through!" I forced myself to push past the pain, shaking my head violently, trying to clear the sonic fog. My muscles screamed, but I reached for the crowbar, adding my own strength to Thorn's. We hammered at the vent cover, a desperate, rhythmic assault against the rusted metal. The metal groaned, bent, but wouldn't break. The shriek from the screamer intensified, a constant, debilitating assault. My head felt like it was going to explode. Then, a new sound, a low, guttural roar, and the unmistakable sound of breaking concrete from the surface. "What now?" I gasped, my voice raw. Thorn's eyes widened in horror. "That's a breaker, a heavy-duty variant. They can smash through walls." My blood ran cold. Screamers, pack leaders, and now breakers. The mutation was relentless, spawning new, more terrifying variants every time we thought we understood the threat. This was truly why global defenses couldn't hold. They weren't just fighting an infection. They were fighting an evolutionary arms race, and humanity was losing. The concrete above us groaned, then cracked. Dust and small pebbles rained down on us. The breaker was directly above, smashing through the reinforced concrete, aiming to crush us in our metal tomb. "The tunnel!" I screamed, pointing back the way we came. "The crawlers! Better them than this!" Thorn didn't hesitate. She grabbed my arm. "Retreat, now!" We scrambled backward, crawling frantically through the cramped ventilation shaft, away from the collapsing concrete and the piercing shriek of the screamer. Behind us, the sounds of destruction intensified. The shaft itself shuddered, rattling violently. We were running from one terrifying threat, straight back into the arms of another. The chittering of the crawlers would be a welcome sound compared to the crushing weight of a breaker. My mind raced, envisioning the crawlers, patient hunters, waiting for us to emerge from the other end of the shaft. We were trapped, a rat in a maze, with two distinct, horrifying mutated Shambler variants closing in. The reality of our situation, the sheer, overwhelming power of this new enemy, pressed down on me. Global defenses couldn't hold, not when faced with such an adaptable, relentless, and truly monstrous foe. Our escape from the city was turning into a desperate, unending chase, and the fear that this might be our last desperate flight was a cold, chilling certainty.
We scrambled backward through the cramped ventilation shaft, dust and rust flaking onto us, the metallic clang of our movements echoing in the suffocating space. Behind us, the rhythmic pounding of the breaker against the concrete grew louder, more insistent, punctuated by the screamer's piercing wails that grated against my teeth and rattled my very bones. Every shudder of the shaft sent a fresh wave of terror through me, convinced that the entire structure would collapse and bury us alive. "They're going to collapse the whole shaft," I gasped, my voice raw, desperate. Thorn gritted her teeth, her headlamp beam bouncing frantically as we crawled. "We have to outrun it. There has to be another exit point, another junction." Her determination was unwavering, but I could hear the desperate edge in her voice, a thread of fear she fought to suppress. My mind, despite the throbbing pain, was a whirlwind of panic and a frantic search for solutions. We were literally caught between a rock and a hard place, the crushing power of the breaker behind us and the unknown but undoubtedly deadly threat of the crawlers ahead.
This Shambler mutation had truly created a multifaceted terror, each variant perfectly adapted to a specific form of hunting and killing. Global defenses couldn't hold because they were constantly trying to fight yesterday's war, while the enemy evolved for tomorrow's. Suddenly, the shaft ahead of us opened into a slightly larger space. Not a full tunnel, but a maintenance hub. A small, square room filled with rusted valves, defunct control panels, and a tangle of thick, insulated wires. And in the center of the room, a large, circular manhole cover. "A manhole!" I shouted, a surge of desperate hope flooding through me. "Surface access!" Thorn's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a glimmer of that same hope. She scrambled forward, making for the manhole cover. "Quickly, it might be our only chance." The breaker's pounding intensified, a deafening drumbeat that shook the entire shaft. Cracks appeared in the metal walls around us, spiderwebbing outwards, a clear sign that the shaft wouldn't hold much longer. Dust rained down in torrents, obscuring our vision. Thorn reached the manhole cover, a heavy cast-iron disc. She tried to budge it, grunting with effort, but it was massive and rusted solid. "It's stuck," she yelled, her voice strained. "Help me." I scrambled to her side, pulling out my crowbar. Together, we tried to wedge it under the edge, straining, muscles screaming. The manhole cover didn't budge, not an inch. It was as if it had been welded shut by decades of rust and disuse. The breaker let out a triumphant roar, followed by a final, earth-shattering impact. The concrete wall of the shaft behind us gave way with a horrific screech of twisting metal and splintering stone. A wave of debris, concrete dust, and jagged metal shrapnel exploded into the maintenance lub, forcing us to duck, shielding our heads. And through the newly formed breach, it lumbered. The breaker. It was colossal. Easily 10 feet tall, a hulking mass of raw, distorted muscle and bone. Its skin thick and calloused like ancient bark. Its head was small, almost an afterthought, sunken into its massive shoulders, and from its neck, an impossibly wide mouth stretched, filled with rows of blunt, grinding teeth. Its arms were like tree trunks, ending in hands that were less fingers and more blunt, club-like instruments, perfect for smashing. It moved with a slow, ponderous gait, each step shaking the very ground beneath us, but its power was terrifyingly evident. It was the embodiment of raw, destructive force, another monstrous product of the Shambler mutation. It roared, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through my chest, and its blank, milky white eyes fixed on us with an unsettling emptiness. It took another slow, deliberate step, its immense bulk filling the breach, effectively cutting off our retreat. We were trapped. Thorn, her face etched with despair, pulled out her pistol, but her hand trembled. "This thing, it's immune to small arms fire," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It'll take a rocket launcher to put this down." My blood ran cold. No escape, no way out.
The sheer, overwhelming power of this mutated shambler was absolute. Global defenses couldn't hold because no weapon, no tactic was prepared for such monstrous evolution. The breaker took another step, closer, closer. Its putrid breath, thick with the scent of pulverized concrete and decay, washed over us. It raised one of its massive club-like arms, a slow, deliberate movement, clearly intending to bring it down upon us. My mind raced, a frantic search for any possible, impossible solution. The crowded space, the tangle of wires, the old control panels, anything. Then I saw it. A thick, coiled cable wrapped around a large, corroded emergency power conduit running directly behind the breaker. And an old, rusted switch panel nearby, labeled Emergency Overload. A desperate, insane idea sparked in my mind. "The power conduit!" I screamed at Thorn, pointing frantically. "If we can short it out, maybe enough to stun it or to spark a fire." Thorn looked, her eyes widening in comprehension. "It's risky. It could kill us too." "What choice do we have?" I yelled back, my voice raw with terror and desperation. The breaker's arm was rising, casting a massive shadow over us. Thorn nodded, a grim resolve settling on her face. "Okay, you go for the switch. I'll try to distract it." She didn't wait for my response. She sprinted past the breaker, a tiny, defiant figure against its immense bulk, drawing its attention. It bellowed, turning its massive head slowly, its blank eyes tracking her. This was my chance. I scrambled over the debris, pushing past the breaker's feet, trying to reach the old control panel. The ground shook with its movements as it slowly turned to face Thorn, who was now drawing its ire with shouts and another pistol shot that harmlessly ricocheted off its thick hide. My fingers, trembling violently, fumbled for the rusted switch on the panel. It was stiff, fused with rust. It wouldn't budge. The breaker was ignoring me, its lumbering form focused solely on Thorn, who was bravely trying to divert its attention, putting her life on the line for me. "It's stuck!" I yelled, my voice thick with despair. Thorn glanced back, her face a mask of fear, but her eyes held a fierce determination. "Use the crowbar! Break it! Overload it!" I didn't hesitate. I jammed the crowbar into the switch panel, leveraging it, twisting, pulling with all my might.
The metal groaned, screeched, then with a sudden violent crack, the switch snapped. A shower of sparks erupted from the panel, immediately followed by a deafening roar of electricity. The thick, insulated cable behind the breaker began to glow red-hot, then burst into a blinding flash of blue-white light. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning ozone and superheated metal. The breaker let out a deafening, tortured shriek, a sound of pure agony. Its massive body convulsed, bathed in the blinding electrical discharge, electricity arcing and dancing over its thick hide. It staggered backward, crashing against the shattered wall of the shaft, sending more debris raining down. The ground shook violently, the entire maintenance hub threatening to collapse. "The manhole!" Thorn screamed, her voice barely audible over the crackling electricity. "Now!" With the breaker momentarily incapacitated, its massive body thrashing in the electrical storm, we had our chance. Thorn, with a surge of renewed strength, grabbed the crowbar from my hands and, with a desperate heave, slammed it under the edge of the manhole cover. The electrical discharge from the conduit, the heat, the vibrations, it had loosened the rust. The manhole cover groaned, then slowly, agonizingly, began to shift. "Push!" Thorn yelled, straining, her face red with effort. Together we shoved, our muscles screaming, our desperate hope fueling every ounce of strength. The manhole finally gave way with a sickening metallic shriek, clattering sideways, revealing a gaping, dark maw leading to the surface. Fresh air, or at least fresher air than the choking fumes of the shaft. The sky, a bruised purple at the edge of twilight, was visible above.
"Go," Thorn urged, pushing me forward. "I'll cover you." I scrambled up, pulling myself through the manhole, my body protesting with every movement. My head emerged into a nightmare world. Not a street, but a derelict park, overgrown and choked with weeds. Smoke billowed from distant buildings, painting the twilight sky in hues of orange and black. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the distant, echoing cries of the mutated world. I turned, reaching down for Thorn, but her eyes were fixed on the maintenance hub below. The breaker, still convulsing, was starting to slow. Its blank eyes were now beginning to regain their focus, tracking her. The electrical overload was fading. "Thorn!" I screamed, my voice raw with panic. "Hurry!" She looked up at me, a grim, sad smile on her face. "Go," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You have to keep going. Someone has to make it out. Someone has to tell them." She was sacrificing herself. For me. "No!" I lunged down, trying to grab her, but she shoved me back with surprising strength.
"Survive!" she commanded, and then, with a desperate, guttural roar, she turned and sprinted towards the breaker, drawing its full, terrifying attention. Its roar filled the maintenance hub, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. She was buying me time, precious, agonizing seconds. I heard the crack of her pistol, a futile gesture against the monstrosity, followed by the sickening thud of the breaker's massive arm descending. A scream, cut short. My heart shattered. Thorn, gone, sacrificed, for me. I pulled myself fully out of the manhole, gasping for breath, tears streaming down my face. The weight of her sacrifice, the crushing despair of losing another human in this relentless, mutated hell, threatened to overwhelm me. But her last word echoed in my mind: survive. I stood in the dying light, alone in a world consumed by horror, the distant screams and roars of the mutated Shamblers a constant reminder of the apocalypse. Global defenses couldn't hold, not against an enemy that took everything from you, even your saviors. My legs felt like lead, my spirit broken. But I had to keep going, for Thorn, for Sarah, for the hope that somewhere, out there, a remnant of humanity still fought, still survived. My nightmare was far from over, and the twilight world stretched out before me, an endless, horrifying testament to the day the Shamblers mutated and everything ended.